grew in lavish exuberance, and fruit of all kinds possessed the most delicate flavor. Clusters of grapes 4 and 5 feet in length, each grape as large as an orange, and apples larger than a man's head typified the wonderful growth of all things on the inside of the earth. The great redwood trees of California would be considered mere underbrush compared with the giant forest trees extending for miles and miles in all directions. In many directions along the foothills of the mountains vast herds of cattle were seen during the last day of our travel on the river. We heard much of a city called Eden, but were kept at Jehu for an entire year. By the end of that time we had learned to speak fairly well the language of this strange race of people. Our instructors, Jules Gaultier and his wife, exhibited that was truly commendable. One day an envoy from the ruler at Eden came to see us, and for 2 whole days my father and myself were put through a series of surprising questions. They wished to know from whence we came, what sort of people dwelt without, what God we worshipped, our religious beliefs, the mode of living in our strange land, and 1,000 other things. The compass which we had brought with us attracted especial attention. My father and I commented between ourselves on the fact that the compass still pointed north, although we now knew that we had sailed over the curve or edge of the Earth's aperture, and were far along southward on the inside surface of the Earth's crust, which, according to my father's estimate and my own, is about 300 miles in thickness from the inside to the outside surface. Relatively speaking, it is no thicker than an eggshell, so that there is almost as much surface on the inside as on the outside of the Earth. The great luminous cloud or ball of dull red fire red in the mornings and evenings, and during the day giving off a beautiful white light, the Smokey god, is seemingly suspended in the center of the great vacuum within the Earth, and held to its place by the immutable law of gravitation, or a repellent atmospheric force, as the case may be. I refer to the known power that draws, or repels with equal force in all directions. The base of this electrical cloud or central luminary, the seat of the gods, is dark and non-transparent, save for innumerable small openings, seemingly in the bottom of the great support or altar of the deity, upon which the Smokey god rests, and the lights shining through these many openings twinkle at night in all their splendor, and seem to be stars, as natural as the stars we saw shining, when in our home at Stockholm. Excepting that they appear larger. The Smokey god, therefore, with each daily revolution of the Earth, appears to come up in the east, and go down in the west the same as does our sun on the external surface. In reality, the people within believe that the Smokey god is the throne of their Jehovah, and is stationary. The effect of night and day is, therefore, produced by Earth's daily rotation. I have since discovered that the language of the people of the inner world is much like the Sanskrit. After we had given an account of ourselves to the emissaries from the central seat of government of the inner continent, and my father had, in his crude way, drawn maps, at their request, of the outside surface of the Earth, showing the divisions of land and water, and giving the name of each of the continents, large islands and the oceans, we were taken overland to the city of Eden, in a conveyance different from anything we have in Europe or America. This vehicle was doubtless some electrical contrivance. It was noiseless, and ran on a single iron rail in perfect balance. The trip was made at a very high rate of speed. We were carried up hills and down dales, across valleys and again along the sides of steep mountains, without any apparent attempt having been made to level the earth as we do for railroad tracks. The car seats were huge yet comfortable affairs, and very high above the floor of the car. On the top of each car were high-geared flywheels lying on their sides, which were so automatically adjusted that, as the speed of the car increased, the high speed of these flywheels geometrically increased. Jules Gaultier explained to us that these revolving fan-like wheels on top of the cars destroyed atmospheric pressure, or what is generally understood by the term gravitation, and with this force thus destroyed or rendered nugatory the car is as safe from falling to one side, or to other from the single-ray track as if it were in a vacuum, the flywheels in their rapid revolutions destroying effectually the so-called power of gravitation, or the force of atmospheric pressure, or whatever potent influence it may be that causes all unsupported things to fall downward to the Earth's surface, or to the nearest point of resistance. The surprise of my father and myself was indescribable when, amid the regal magnificence of a spacious hall, we were finally brought before the great high priest, ruler over all the land. He was richly robed, and much taller than those about him, and could not have been less than 14 or 15 feet in height. The immense room in which we were received seemed finished in solid slabs of gold thickly studded with jewels of amazing brilliancy. The city of Eden is located in what seems to be a beautiful valley, yet, in fact, it is on the loftiest mountain plateau of the inner continent, several thousand feet higher than any portion of the surrounding country. It is the most beautiful place I have ever beheld in all my travels. In this elevated garden all manner of fruits, vines, shrubs, trees, and flowers grow in riotous profusion. In this garden 4 rivers have their source in a mighty artesian fountain. They divide and flow in 4 directions. This place is called by inhabitants the navel of the earth, or the beginning, the cradle of the human race. The names of the rivers are the Euphrates, the Pison, the Gihon, and the Hiddekel. And the Lord God planted a garden, and out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The Book of Genesis. The unexpected awaited us in this palace of beauty, in the finding of our little fishing craft. It had been brought before the high priest in perfect shape, just as it had been taken from the waters that day, when it was loaded on board the ship by the people who discovered us on the river more than a year before. We were given an audience of over 2 hours with this great dignitary, who seemed kindly disposed and considerate. He showed himself eagerly interested, asking us numerous questions, and invariably regarding things about which his emissaries had failed to inquire. At the conclusion of the interview he inquired our pleasure, asking us whether we wished to remain in his country, or if we preferred to return to the outer world, providing it were possible to make a successful return trip, across the frozen belt barriers, that encircle both the northern and southern openings of the earth. My father replied it would please me, and my son to visit your country, and see your people, your colleges and palaces of music and art, your great fields, your wonderful forests of timber, and after we have had this pleasurable privilege, we should like to try to return to our home on the outside surface of the earth. This son is my only child, and my good wife will be weary awaiting our return. I fear you can never return, replied the chief high priest, because the way is a most hazardous one. However, you shall visit the different countries with Jules Gaultier as your escort, and be accorded every courtesy and kindness. Whenever you are ready to attempt a return voyage, I assure you, that your boat which is here on exhibition, shall be put in the waters of the river Hiddekel at its mouth, and we will bid you Jehovah speed. Thus terminated our only interview with the high priest or ruler of the continent. Part 4 We learned, that the males do not marry, before they are from 75 to 100 years old, and that the age at which women enter wedlock is only a little less, and that both men and women frequently live to be from 600 to 800 years old, and in some instances much older. Josephus says God prolonged the life of the patriarchs that preceded the deluge, both on account of their virtues and to give them the opportunity of perfecting the sciences of geometry and astronomy, which they had discovered, which they could not have done, if they had not lived 600 years, because it is only after the lapse of 600 years, that the great year accomplished. Flammarion, Astronomical Myths, Paris p. 26. During the following year we visited many villages and towns, prominent among them being the cities of Niji, Delphi, Hectia, and my father was called upon no less than a half-dozen times, to go over the maps which had been made from the rough sketches he had originally given of the divisions of land and water on the outside surface of the earth. I remember hearing my father remark, that the giant race of people in the land of the Smokey god had almost as accurate an idea of the geography of the outside surface of the earth as had the average college professor in Stockholm. In our travels we came to a forest of gigantic trees, near the city of Delphi. Had the Bible said there were trees towering over 300 feet in height, and more than 30 feet in diameter, growing in the Garden of Eden, the Ingersolls, the Tom Paines and Voltaires would doubtless have pronounced the statement a myth. Yet this is the description of California Sequoia gigantea, but these California giants pale into insignificance when compared with the forest Goliaths found in the within continent, where abound mighty trees from 800 to 1,000 feet in height, and from 100 to 120 feet in diameter, countless in numbers, and forming forests extending hundreds of miles back from the sea. The people are exceedingly musical, and learn to a remarkable degree in their arts and sciences, especially geometry and astronomy. Their cities are equipped with vast palaces of music, where not infrequently as many as 25,000 lusty voices of this giant race swell forth in mighty choruses of the most sublime symphonies. The children are not supposed to attend institutions of learning before they are 20 years old. Then their school life begins and continues for 30 years, 10 of which are uniformly devoted by both sexes to study of music. Their principal vocations are architecture, agriculture, horticulture, the raising of vast herds of cattle, and the building of conveyances peculiar to that country, for travel on land and water. By some device, which I cannot explain, they hold communion with one another between the most distant parts of their country, on air currents. All buildings are erected with special regard to strength, durability, beauty, and symmetry, and with a style of architecture vastly more attractive to the eye than any I have ever observed elsewhere. About 3/4 of the inner surface of the Earth island, and about 1/4 water. There are numerous rivers of tremendous size, some flowing in a northerly direction and others southerly. Some of these rivers are 30 miles in width, and it is out of these vast waterways, at the extreme northern and southern parts of the inside surface of the Earth, in regions where low temperatures are experienced, that freshwater icebergs are formed. They are then pushed out to sea like huge tons of ice, by the abnormal freshets of turbulent waters that, twice every year, sweep everything before them. We saw innumerable specimens of bird life no larger than those encountered in the forests of Europe or America. It is well known that during the last few years whole species of birds have quit the Earth. A writer in a recent article on this subject, says almost every year sees the final extinction of one or more bird species. Out of 14 varieties of birds found a century, since on a single island, the West Indian island of St. Thomas, 8 have now to be numbered among the missing. Is it not possible that these disappearing bird species quit their habitation without, and find an asylum in the within world? Whether inland among the mountains, or along the seashore, we found bird life prolific. When they spread their great wings, some of the birds appeared to measure 30 feet from tip to tip. They are of great variety and many colors. We were permitted to climb up on the edge of the rock, and examine a nest of eggs. There were 5 in the nest, each of which was at least 2 feet in length and 15 inches in diameter. After we had been in the city of Hector about a week, Professor Gauldier took us to an inlet, where we saw thousands of tortoises along the sandy shore. I hesitate to state the size of these great creatures. They were from 25 to 30 feet in width and fully 7 feet in height. When one of them projected its head, it had the appearance of some hideous sea monster. The strange conditions within are favorable not only for vast meadows of luxuriant grasses, forests of giant trees, and all manner of vegetation life, but wonderful animal life as well. One day we saw a great herd of elephants. There must have been 500 of these thunder-throated monsters, with their restlessly waving trunks. They were tearing huge boughs from the trees, and trampling smaller growth into dust like so much hazel brush. They would average over 100 feet in length and 75 to 85 in height. It seemed, as I gazed upon this wonderful herd of giant elephants, that I was again living in the public library at Stockholm.